Do you want to use a predominantly games-based approach to your coaching for hurling or football? You're trying to develop the main principles of play in various attacking, defending or transition scenarios. You're trying to develop the core skills in the context of the game where they will normally use them. And overall, you're trying to maximise the amount of training time you have. While trying to develop all the principles of the game and the key skills, you're unsure how much of a physical benefit or stimulus your players are getting. I've spoken a few times before through different videos of the potential benefits of using games for physical conditioning, but also how we can use top-up runs to fill the buckets that may not get as much of an emphasis from a game-based approach. This is largely based on my own experience. So I made contact with Cian O'Dea. He's Coach Education Manager with Connacht GAA, but more importantly, he's completing his PhD around the potential physical benefits of a games-based approach to coaching. We looked at a few different aspects, such as the typical template he used for a couple of studies so far, what form that takes through the different games in terms of playing numbers, pitch size, recovery times, and how he varies between larger and small-sided games. All had a core principle of play or moment of the game embedded throughout, and we looked at where improvements in fitness came based off how those sessions were structured and progressed over time. And possibly just as importantly, we looked at what elements of fitness weren't developed through a games-based approach. This lets us know how we can develop fitness through games, but also some of the areas we might need to target a little more specifically or through isolated work to make sure players are fully prepared for the demands of the game. There are so many valuable takeaways in this, right from the off in terms of how we structure, design our sessions to make sure we're getting the most from, even from a principles of play aspect, but also some of the potential physical benefits we can get, how we can tweak those based on what we want to get from our players, or potential areas some players might be weak in, so they're broadly more developed throughout our whole team. Right, so Cian, we're going to try belt this out now because you're on call there. You could be called away to the maternity ward at any stage.
That's it, yeah. So busy times ahead, but on red alert at the minute. But look, all going well so far. So hopefully it continues going that way for sure.
Hopefully she can hang on for the next 45 or so minutes, and yours then you can dedicate yourself to her, Steph, and to do a baby then for as long as you want afterwards.
That's it.
Cian, so you're looking at games-based approach, particularly the physical fitness part of it. You might just give us a bit of an overview first on what is like a games-based approach. I'm going to guess, I'm going to throw a big statement out here now. With a big focus on a games-based approach, you probably aren't a huge fan of drills. But just tell us what the difference is, game-based approach and a few other bits around it.
Yeah, look, it's a good point, and I suppose I'm very wary of going into like conversations around, are drills better in games and stuff, because it's not probably real life coaching. Like real life coaching, you would have, it's probably a healthy combination of both. But anyway, like games-based approaches do represent, we'll say, coaching models or coaching practices, frameworks, whatever you want to call it, that I suppose prioritise learning through games first and foremost. And then they combine this participation in games with facilitative coaching strategies or behaviours. So that would be questioning, scaffolding, and providing opportunities for player-led discussion and dialogue overall. I suppose an important thing to kind of mention is that, it's games-based approaches, so there is numerous sort of iterations or variations of games-based approaches, including teaching games through understanding. So I'm sure, John, you've come across that with your physical education background. I'm sure a lot of the listeners as well have game sense, which is kind of a more of a organised sport version of TGFU. Play practice is another one. Tactical games model, tactical decision learning model, and like there's all them kind of variations of them, but they do have, I suppose, common characteristics. And them common characteristics would be, again, like the design and manipulation of practice games and activities, the use of questioning, providing opportunities for dialogue and group discussion, and also creating a positive socio-moral environment. So I suppose, that probably encompasses what games-based approaches are. The research today would suggest that games-based approaches are quite effective in terms of developing decision-making and tactical understanding, as well as having positive effects on enjoyment and motivation. So reviews by Paul Knirk has done great work, and he really did a nice job of summarising the literature on games-based approaches in organised sport, and reviews before that by Harvey and Jarrett and Oslin and Mitchell then prior to that, and also recent meta-analysis by Mann et al. 2024 kind of showed them sort of effects of games-based approaches. I suppose then, like, where hopefully my PhD will come into it is, as you kind of mentioned there, is kind of looking at games-based approaches from a physical perspective, and we don't have that information at the minute. There hasn't been, we don't know. And hopefully my research will contribute to this, but we don't know the kind of the physical demands of games-based approaches. We don't know the cardiovascular responses to games-based approaches. I suppose that's essentially where hopefully my research will come into it. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So like the games-based approaches, I'll actually just give an example. I was chatting to a coach yesterday. He ran a workshop recently. It was hurling based, but he was in a wall ball based workshop, and he gave a few people clickers. And just said, to say I'm paired with you, you're doing the session, I'm observing, and every time you like have a possession of the ball, I click it. So he counted how many and broke it up into a warm-up, say drill and game. And in the warm-up, say you got 80 possessions. In the drill, I can't remember how many, and then the game you got 8. And you're like, oh, so is the warm-up and all the little striking bits you're in there better because you're getting 80 touches versus 8? He said, but think of the quality of those 8 possessions within the game. While there aren't as many, every time you get a possession there, you've probably had to go into some kind of space, and so there's a decision part of that. But you also have to make a decision on what you do with the ball. Do you maintain possession? Do you carry? Do you give it off? Who do you give it off to? All like that. So that's just even a small way of saying when doing stuff through games, there may not actually be as much possession or contacts with the ball, but the quality and the context around them can be so much more.
No, definitely, John. But there is an obsession I would find around touches and being in possession all the time. But how much time do you actually spend in possession in a game? Like, a huge part of the game is your off the ball actions. It's probably you spend most probably parts of games off the ball. So it's just keeping that context in mind. And again, I'm not going down the route of saying one is better than the other, but it's just kind of keeping that sort of in mind. Like, are we addressing both the cognitive aspects of the game and the off the ball aspects, as well as the on the ball and in possession aspects?
Yeah, I think as you said earlier, like, it's not that like games and drills one is better than the other. It's how we use both is a lot of it. Because like even in exams, like I'm doing a micro coaching module at the minute, and we're doing some of Stephen Harvey's work and Chris Cushion's around like questions and all. And like you can go out and play a game and actually get very little from it other than like hope the players learn something, or you can be a bit more intentional in the size of the game, the number of players on it, some of the conditions or rules you put on it, and ideally the questions you ask around it, but even at a lower level that the feedback you give around it there. So we know there's a huge amount of learning that can come from that, whereas you're looking more specifically at the physical outputs of it. So do you want to maybe touch on the overview of what you have planned and then why you're doing it in that particular way, or the other way around, if that makes more sense?
Yeah, I suppose I've done 2 studies. I've completed 2 studies at the minute. The plan for the third study is to more or less build on the information that we've gathered from the first 2 studies, and then there will be a forward contribution. I'll be honest, we don't necessarily know what that will be. So in fairness, my primary supervisor David Kelly has been kind of great sort of guiding light on having like an applied research sports science model which was published by Bishop in 2008, 2009, and I suppose aligning with that as best we can. And so initially study 1 then that we did was just essentially understand what's actually going on from a physical perspective in games-based approaches. Study 2 then we looked to implement a games-based approach intervention. So basically pre-test physical characteristics. Again, we can go into what tests we've completed later on, but and then implement a 6 weeks game-based approach program, post-test the players afterwards, and see what the kind of effects were, and maybe more importantly see where there was no effect, because again that there is information in that as well. Our third study then, so probably be early next year, March towards April next year, and we're looking to, I suppose, understand the relationship between player characteristics and physical outputs during games-based approach sessions. And then player characteristics will be a combination of both physical and technical, I suppose, characteristics. The whole like assessing, again, that's another probably conversation, but how we assess technical proficiency is going to be a challenging one, but we are kind of leaning more towards the in-game assessment, and again leaning on the work of Stephen Harvey in 2009 and even Paul Clark there recently in 2025. Like, the in-game assessments potentially are that bit more valuable. Maybe, yeah, and there's just our research there to kind of go off as well and base our assessment game off. So that's kind of where we're going. Like I said, the forward contribution, not entirely sure what that'll be, but that's kind of where we're at the minute.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. Like, you have to use your first few studies to ask a few questions to tee up what's come afterwards. No, that makes perfect sense. We'll jump into 1 and 2 in a bit more detail, but say that, like, that third one you said there about player characteristics, is that like to dumb it down a bit, is that looking at nearly, if you have someone who is quite fit in terms of aerobic capacity beforehand, are they more likely to have higher outputs in games, or potentially do the higher outputs in games lead to aerobic capacity? Is it kind of looking a little bit at what's the chicken, what's the egg there, kind of?
Yes, exactly. So yeah, it's probably more the first one that you said. So do players with higher aerobic capacity produce higher physical outputs in games-based approach sessions? Equally then, like, what is their cardiovascular responses in them sessions? So, like, there is good research out there that suggests there's a ceiling effect for fitter players within small-sided games, within games-based training. So, like, that is useful insight for coaches, because potentially they need more of a, I suppose, strenuous or controlled cardiovascular stimulus to maintain their, we'll say, aerobic capacity or whatever, because they're not hitting that in games. Equally, on the opposite side, players who are less fit, they might be, disproportionately, I suppose, receiving that cardiovascular stimulus in games. And that, again, that might inform if you're doing any supplementary conditioning on top of that, that might inform that too. And then lastly, we'll be looking at kind of your players' neuromuscular characteristics, so like their sprint speed and jump profiles and that kind of thing. So do players with better performance in them tests, are they, I suppose, do they accumulate high speed running and sprint distance that bit more regularly or that bit more easily in game based approaches? And again, that should have insight for coaches around, what are them profiles getting in games, what are they not getting in games, that kind of thing. Hopefully that makes sense now.
No, that makes perfect sense, because it's kind of like looking at, and we'll probably touch on this anyway, say if there's any bits you're potentially missing from games, how do you top them up, like, or are there any buckets that need to be filled, I usually say. So that gives you a much better insight even going in, instead of just looking at a game and trying to work off GPS, say, okay, this game has given us this, we probably need to top it up with this bit here, whereas based on a player's individual characteristics, you might be able to, like, tweak it a small bit to make it not fully individualised, but maybe group players a little bit differently or what. Good, so we'll jump into study 1 then, and let's start off just looking at what is actually happening there, because a games-based approach can mean very different things, very different people, even in terms of the game that's actually being played in front of you. Yeah, no, definitely. So, look, I'll describe what maybe the sessions look like, how we monitor the sessions. That might be the best way to go. And I suppose just before I do describe, this isn't the only way you can design a games-based approach. It's the way probably I went with. It was easiest for me, and I must give a big mention to Game Sense Coaching. So the Lavin brothers there, like, they helped me massively in terms of I suppose how to design games-based approach sessions, and made it really easy for me to choose the games-based approach I wanted to use and that kind of thing. So look, a big mention to them and all their help on that side of things. But I suppose the sessions we delivered did closely resemble Game Sense, which again, like I said, is one of the games-based approaches that you can use. So essentially what them sessions look like, very practically, warm-up, which essentially followed your typical ramp structure, only the raise part of it did somewhat link with the theme of the session, if that makes sense. So, for example, if we work on a session focused on transition, if the principles of play that you wanted to address in the session focused on transition was third player runners, then we did a small raise activity, whereas 1 kicks to 2, 2 hand passes to 3, 3 kicks to 4. So you're just working on that support play all the time in that raise sort of activity, if that makes sense. Then your activate and mobilise parts of it were similar to, probably standard warm-ups out there. And then your potentiate, look, there's numerous ways you can go about the potentiate. For that G-based study 1,
we essentially just increased the intensity of that first part. And that changed slightly for the intervention, but I'll just stick with study 1 for now. After that warm-up then, we went straight into an initial game. And so that was more or less a full-sided game depending on the numbers. So if you had 24 players there, it was a 12v12 game, but the game was themed essentially. And again, I'll probably just go back a step. Each one of these sessions was, I suppose, linked to a game moment. So a game moment in Gaelic football, they've been outlined by Mangan in 2019. The game moments in Gaelic football, for example, are transition from defence to attack, transition from attack to defence, attacking organisation, defensive organisation, and contest for possession. So these sessions in Study 1 were all aligned with transition from defence to attack. Sorry, I probably should have started with that.
That's no hassle at all. And they're all kind of, I suppose each coach would have their own broad or game model. They might be tweaking bits within that from. Yeah, we won't go fully into that today, but I think that is important to note. And if people want to go look up the game models, and even it probably is a bit based on tactical periodisation across your week and stuff too. But we'll let people look that up in their own time, or I'll touch on it again in the future.
So I'll just go back then to what the sessions looked like. So our initial game, again, like I said, it was a full-sided game, depending on the numbers we had. And very simply, within them initial games, you're just looking to promote the principles of play that contribute to effective transition. So, for example, give and go was a principle of play that we were looking to really sort of promote in that initial game. And in that initial game, essentially to promote that, there was a pivot in the middle. So that might have been me as a coach, might have been another coach. If you use the pivot, the person that passes the pivot must make the attempt to go again. Otherwise, it's a turnover. And so it's a full-sided game outside of that, but there's that, I suppose, small condition, and it's just sowing the seed in the player's head around the behaviours we want to see throughout the session. After that initial game then, pose a couple of questions. Maybe how did that game go for you? That kind of thing. What were we trying to promote there? Why are we trying to promote it? Just trying to extract that information from them. Then we went into 2 modified games. And there's loads of ways you can modify your games. For me, in that study, we just reverted to 2 small-sided games, essentially. So they were half, if you had 24, you're going 6v6, one side of the pitch, 6v6, the other side of the pitch. And very simply, again, promoting the same principles of play. Instead of having one pivot, we had 2 pivots on each pitch. And so you're just allowing that behaviour to occur more frequently in a game situation, if that makes sense. 2 pivots there should encourage their player's head to get up straight away, looking to pass the ball forward, and making that attempt to, once they pass forward, to go again. And that's essentially what you're promoting. Because it's a smaller sided game, that's going to happen more frequently. And I suppose theoretically then, because it happens more frequently in training, you're hoping that transfers onto the pitch then. Then the second modified game was more focused on, I suppose, third player runners. Again, 6v6, one side of the pitch, 6v6, the other side of the pitch. And essentially there was an unmarked player either end, and teams were scoring to that person. In order to complete a score, they had to kick into that unmarked player or unmarked coach, and there must be a third player runner off that unmarked, if that makes sense, to complete the score. An extra added condition, if there was a kick pass from your own half to that unmarked pivot, you get 3 points with a player coming off that pivot then. So they were the kind of small sort of ways we look to promote them principles of play. And then lastly then, it's probably very important, returning back to the initial game then, to, I suppose, are the behaviours that you've promoted throughout the session, are they also occurring when you go back into the initial game, which is more of a full-sided game again, essentially. So look, I've probably provided a lot of information there. Hopefully that makes sense. But look, if there's any follow-up questions on that, sure, belt away.
No, that's really good. So, was this all one team, or were you looking across a few different teams or clubs?
Yeah, so we essentially picked 4 groups. Again, convenient, very much a convenient sample. And I just working off my own contacts that I know. So basically we went for a male adult team, all sub-elite by the way, male adult team, female adult team, female youth team, and a male youth team as well. And then youth teams were under 16 players.
and you gave them all like the same principles of play and pretty much the same session design, and then just to see what are the physical outputs, how do they differ based on a similar session design across different contexts or different...
Yeah, and like, I suppose we didn't necessarily perform any statistical significant testing on like the differences between groups. Again, we just went fully in there with the aim of describing like what is actually going on here in games-based approach sessions, because we just didn't know that. And then even the relative metrics as well, like the meters per minute, high-speed running meters per minute, also time in different percentages of heart rate, like time in different heart rate zones and things like that. Also, a nice kind of element of it, and I think it is somewhat overlooked around the games, is actually the session-to-session variability of certain metrics. Even though you might perform the same session, how do them metrics vary from session to session. So yeah, that's probably that's the way we went down. And we did do focus groups after as well, just to get an idea of I suppose how the players were experiencing both the physical demands of the sessions and also the cognitive stimulation within the sessions as well.
Good, Jess. What were some of the main findings then, or differences across the different groupings or contexts? Yeah,
so I suppose the main findings was that locomotor demands did differ across groups, like notably different. And I suppose the main adult group led the way in that regard in terms of accumulating more meters per minute, more high-speed running meters per minute compared to all other groups. And look, potentially that's just expected, and potentially physical characteristics contribute to that. Playing standard might contribute to that as well. We don't know for sure, but you can only, I suppose, speculate based on existing research. An interesting part of it was, although there was notable difference in locomotor demands, the cardiovascular responses were quite similar across groups in terms of there was similar internal stress across each group despite this sort of difference in locomotor demands. And like that kind of feeds, like just because a male youth player is only covering, we'll say, I think on average they covered close to around 6,000 metres, whereas the male adult group covered around 8,000 metres on average in these sessions. It doesn't mean it's any less effective from an internal or physiological load perspective. If that hopefully that makes sense. The other main finding from the session-to-session variability is that so your higher speed metrics, so your high speed running, your sprint distance per minute, your high intensity accelerations and decelerations, they are less consistent from session to session. So that means that stimulus isn't the same. Even though you're standardising that session, you can't necessarily predict that you're going to get the same high speed running values in each session. And that's just because that's just natural probably consequence of using games. I mean, it's so chaotic using games, you can't really predict anything that's going to happen in it. Players are responding to external stimuli all the time, and that's probably a main benefit of games-based approaches from like a learning and technical tactic development. But from a physical perspective, it's an ultimate limitation of games-based approaches. So we can go into maybe the qualitative. Have it covered maybe, or
that's really good stuff. Just a couple of questions on it. Questions are like queries, I suppose. You were saying there the internal stress is probably similar despite less distance being covered. Like, is it also a case of they're probably covering percentage-wise a similar distance compared to the demands of an actual game? Like, say if you're saying there, and like I know distance covered is not the most relevant thing, it's the other metrics underneath it, but for example, if an under 16 covers 6k, it's probably not massively different to demands of an under 16 game. Whereas if an adult covers 8k, it's probably not massively different to demands of an adult game. So, like, relative to what they're going to be playing, it's probably that's probably fine, is it?
Yeah. No, you're right. Yeah. No, I suppose I'm only going off from a physiological or internal load perspective. I suppose what I meant there is to not potentially undermine that. That effect that's going on there. So like you can still get huge benefits from across groups, and like that's another thing. Like there would have been, again, we didn't do any analysis or didn't quantify this, but there would have been like massive differences in the playing level and the playing standard between groups. But in spite of that, you're still getting a nice physiological response there, in spite of that sort of difference in playing standard.
Yeah, it's probably a case then of like if you want to get better at your sport, you want to play at a level that's like ever so slightly above you,
And it's probably similar for the physical side of it. Like, to push yourself physically, you probably want to be playing at a pace that is appropriate or slightly above your pace. So if you threw one of those under 16s down with the adults, like, they break because there's not able to cope with those demands. And if you want the adults down with the under 16s, it wouldn't be enough of stimulus because it's not appropriate to their level. So that is good. Like, once you're playing the sport at, I suppose, an appropriate technical and tactical challenge, there probably will be an appropriate, to a point, physical stimulus there as well. So no, that's really good to get, like, because even like you were saying there around differences around high speed meters and like various metrics. Like, I remember one year I was working with an county team, and by a mile the worst game we played all year was the game we had the highest of everything physically. And I remember another game, like, some lads just played so well, it was one particular game, and the doctor actually texted me after saying, can you just send me on a few numbers? I'm eager to know what lads covered. And like, total distance down, high speed running down, accelerations, decelerations about the same. I was like, I don't know. There's just so many things that can impact it other than how you play and stuff. So, you know, they're always just going to be a bit up and down, I suppose, just having a general range or trying to stay within games, I suppose.
And just, I suppose, a caveat on the whole, like what I'm saying, a nice physiological response. And look, on average, the sessions do appear to give you quite severe, like close to, I suppose, match-specific physiological response, if that makes sense. But the between player variability is substantial, and again, that's probably a thing that is overlooked when you're constantly using games. Like, you can't necessarily standardise the intensity across the group, and I suppose if you are looking to develop the collective, like, using games alone is probably you're potentially leaving I suppose adaptations on the table, because not everyone is getting the same stimulus, and that might be fine if you're just chasing game demands. But if you're trying to stress physical capacities, that's another sort of question there, and another sort of I suppose mindset to just bear that in mind, you know.
Yeah, I think we'll come to that in a bit more detail later on, but no, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, some of the qualitative bits then.
Yeah, so look, this actually, I wasn't expecting to enjoy it as much, but it was actually some of the most enjoyable part of the research that I did engage in. Mainly, like, because the enjoyment of the sessions was clear throughout. And now, taking that with a pinch of salt, but maybe it was just because these were new sessions compared to what we usually do. And, you know, the novelty of it is something to kind of just keep in mind. But there was also, like, common remarks around how they found the sessions physically demanding and physically challenging, having to sustain work rate throughout the sessions because you're playing in games all the time, and also because these games require the players to, I suppose, attack and defend, similar to a real game, I suppose. There was a lot of remarks around having to transition swiftly between attack and defence. In terms of then, there was, like, nice mention around, like, engaging with the game conditions and how, I suppose, that can transfer to competition. So, for example, in the female youth group, they did seem to think that in the most recent games that they played, like, there was already an impact on their performance, essentially. Now, look, again, it's hard to, you know, concretely say, yeah, look, these sessions contribute to that. But it was nice to hear that in such a sort, like 3 sessions we did, and they were, I suppose, perceiving it to have a massive impact on how they transitioned their support play. They felt improved drastically and things like that. So that was nice to hear. Some kind of maybe, I suppose, feedback on how to improve the sessions, which was good to hear, particularly from the male adult group, where this group were at a high level, I suppose, for a club team. And did kind of say it might be difficult to go really in depth around the tactical nuance of the game within these sessions. Now, they did kind of say, having said that, it would be easy to implement them things just by some slight variations in the game. Other things that came up were the players did kind of assume that potentially you do need a requisite level of fitness before participating in these games. Otherwise, you mightn't enjoy them that much. You know, which I thought, like, it's a very interesting point, in fairness. But look, aside from them sort of small pieces of feedback, overall it was very positive around, I suppose, the learned outcomes, the level of collaboration among players, particularly in the group discussion periods, providing players the opportunity to, I suppose, solve problems themselves, essentially. That was apparent throughout the focus groups, and look, hopefully we'll get that study published and it'll be a bit more apparent what the findings were from that.
That's interesting around saying you need the requisite level of fitness to go into, because I was going to ask, did anyone say, oh yeah, it's brilliant and it's enjoyable, but I still feel we need that bit of hard running? Like, was anyone saying, oh, this would be great now, but you'd still need to throw in a few runs there on a Friday night or Sunday morning, or send us off up the mountain at some stage?
Look, I can't say there was from the focus groups now, because they were surprised how like kind of fatigued and how physically challenged they were just from the games alone. But like, I don't like, particularly that male adult group, like they'd be under no illusions as to like, you know, as is this how it is going forward, and that, like, as in we're only doing games from a physical, like there wouldn't be any illusions that you still probably need some more isolated methods at certain stages of the year potentially.
Yeah, we'll touch on that. Something I'm intrigued around there, and if this fits with the intervention more, leave it till then, but like the big things that always guide me in deciding games are like, so I categorise them like large, medium, small, and I actually take it from kind of athletics based stuff. So
okay.
If you're to categorise, say, if you're training for a 5k or 10k, most of the sessions I always find fall into like either kind of VO2 max and 5k pace stuff, and I will do that for between 1 and 2 minutes per rep and do 10 to 15 minutes of total work. Then your medium stuff would be, and I would see that as like 3 to 4 players aside, up to maybe 6 aside. Then your, what I'd look at as lactate threshold work that you would do around your 1 hour pace or 10 mile pace, say, that would be 7 aside to 11 aside, play for 4 to 6-ish minutes, maybe 8 at a push, and you're doing 20 to 25 total minutes of work. And then your larger side of game, so 12 to 15 aside, you look to do 30 to 40, maybe 45 minutes total work, and I'll never really do a bout for longer than 12 or 13 minutes there, and I'll just break them off that. But say like, it's the bouts between them, like how much break are you giving between? Are you looking at an RPE around that, and will you tailor and pitch size a bit for any of these, or does this come into the intervention stuff?
Yeah, I suppose, well, from study one was the trickiest part of this, because you need to standardise the sessions the best possible, irrespective of the numbers you had. I'm kind of smiling here because like basically I had to maintain the same relative playing area for each game. The relative playing area went after was 371 metres squared, which is adapted from a full-sided game on a standard club pitch. And again, big mention to Cathal Craig there. So he's done, in his PhD, he would have done a lot of work around I suppose deriving your smaller sided games in terms of relative playing area from the full-sided game. So he would have guided me big time on that. So, but I'm laughing because I suppose you'd have an idea of 24 players coming down. You have the pitch set up for 24 players, and all of a sudden you have a straggler coming along then 10 minutes into the session, and you have to adjust things then to try and maintain the relative playing area. But that's why I'm kind of smiling. But so that was a tough piece of it. So just an example of that. So like, and again, when I did these games, people were like, God, the space here is massive for these games. So for example, in a 4v4 game, we'll say, let's say you did 16 players at the session. Your initial game was 8v8. Your small sided games were 4v4. That the space you're looking at, or the dimensions, are 70 metres long by 43 to 45 metres wide to give you that relative playing area. So like if you think of that, that's nearly the full width of the pitch if you're going across the pitch, and then end line to close to the 45. Like that is a considerable amount of space. But the idea,
that's kind of quarter of the pitch, is it?
Yeah.
It's like, thinking it out like that, it's a big space for 4v4.
So like, now the idea behind that, again, Cathal, like the research he's done in his PhD, like he would have seen that maintaining that relative playing area is important for making the full array of skills available to the player. So, and I think you've had conversation on this podcast around small sided games being in the box all the time, and like all that goes on is hand passing and this kind of thing, and it's very tight. Whereas part of the games based approach is representative game design and adhering to that strongly. So one way for me to do that was maintaining that relative playing area and making sure they had that, I suppose, level of space to, they can hand pass if that's the right option, but they can also kick pass and play the long game if they need to as well. In terms of break, because that was the second part of your question, so in terms of recovery between games, we would have adhered to a 2-to-1 work to rest essentially all the time. And there was 2 reasons for that. So we're probably aligning with recommendations from Martin Bichette's review papers on high intensity interval training. And within that, he has recommendations for game based HIIT essentially is what he's called it. And so then work to rest, and also it did as a coach. So if I know, let's say you're working for 6 minutes, you have 2 to 3 minutes rest. Then, like, I have to be really succinct and concise. With the questions I pose. Equally, if the players are in group discussions, they have to be really purposeful around what they're discussing and things like that. So there was sort of a dual purpose behind maintaining that, I suppose, 2-to-1 work to rest. Hopefully, does that answer your question?
Oh, no, that's really good, yeah, because it's something I'm always wary of, even like when we do a lot, we take a very much game-based approach to training. The team got knocked out last weekend. Like, even in between matches, I am straight on the stopwatch and I'm looking at the manager pointing to it saying, 3 minutes gone, come on, we need to get back in here. And he's very good at keeping it right, but you do have to keep on top of yourself around those, because you can go into long discussions that might be really valuable, and like, that's where sometimes you might need to park it. Is it about the physical or is it about the tactical here in this situation? Sometimes you just need to say, no, I think tactically it's worth spending a bit more time on this discussion. That just can't be every session, because you lose too much of the physical stimulus if that happens too often.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I suppose you did touch on, and that's interesting how you're using the athletics sort of background to I suppose, categorise your games. And I suppose my sort of view on it is that in terms of physiological responses in both smaller sided and large sided games and the internal stress, like, they are quite different. So like your 4v4 games compared to your 10v10, like, that is quite different in terms of the physiological load you're going to receive. So for example, in that 4v4 game, you're probably going to spend a lot of time, a higher percentage of estimated heart rate max. So you're thinking zone 5, zone 6, 80, 90%, because you're just so involved in the game. There's absolutely no respite. But equally, the limitation of them types of games are you're not going to potentially accumulate the high-speed running distance, the sprint distances and that kind of thing. For your larger sided games, it's nearly the opposite, like, because there's other players all the time there, and there's other stuff going on away from you. You're probably not going to get that high level of internal loading from them games in terms of spending time above 90% heart rate max. But the flip side of that is you probably are going to accumulate the high speed running demands that you need and the sprint distance demands that you need as well. So I suppose, look, I probably haven't gone into as in depth as you have there around, categorising in terms of like your athletic sort of markers there, but they'd be the kind of things I'd be looking around categorising against smaller sided and large sided, and obviously your medium sided kind of give you a nice mix of both then essentially.
Yeah, I know, I think you're bang on there. Like, the categorising is more just for me to, over the course of a week, and I try and tick a few different boxes. Or it's more to guide timing of games, because I used to find myself doing the smaller stuff, like some of the murder ball type games. I was trying to do them for 4 and 5 minutes, and sure, realistically, would I go out would I go do reps at 5k pace for 5 minutes? Sure, I'd be dead after it. So that's why I started tweaking them to stuff that way, more just to manage the time accumulated in games, as opposed to, because like realistically, if I was doing reps, not that I'm injured now, nothing right, but if I was doing reps at 5k pace, I would be kind of 172 and above for the whole thing. If I was doing 3 by 12 minutes, I would be around somewhere in the 160s. So it probably is similar output across players, relative to their distance, and that's how I'm trying to balance it off. But the neuromuscular demands will be wholly different across the different types of games you're playing.
And then, like, I suppose I probably didn't answer it. I suppose, how long did we actually go for in these games? So for initial games, we just went, so that could have been your 10v10, 12v12 essentially. We just went 6 minutes on, 2 minutes off, essentially. Our smaller sided games, we went 3 minutes on, 1.5 minutes off. They're the kind of, and again, just going off recommendations from the likes of Martin Bichette there, his 2 review papers, and going off some of the common durations you see in small sided games, and also linking in with Cathal Craig and David, my supervisors, around like what do they think potentially are suitable sort of durations. But for ease and simplicity in this study and to standardise the sessions, we just went them sort of blanket durations essentially.
They make sense. Like, I think if coaches want to extend them out a bit, they can too. Particularly as the players know the rules a bit more, know the styles of play, you probably can extend them a little bit. Whereas if you need to tweak things as you go, then yeah, it's shortened just to get a little bit more instruction stuff in there. Or as the season goes on and they get a bit more physically prepared, they might be able to cope with. Whereas you find things are breaking down after 6 minutes, well, that's probably what you need to call it, instead of trying to squeeze an extra 2 minutes of poor quality out. Your intervention then.
Yeah, so look, the intervention, that's where all the fun stuff is. But as David would commonly remind me, like intervention was where the good stuff is, but the steps beforehand are equally as crucial, I suppose. But yeah, I suppose so. I'll just get straight into what we tested. So we would have tested drop jump, counter movement jump. So drop jump, we're measuring the player's reactive strength. Counter movement jump, lower body rate of force development or lower body power. We would have measured their 10 metre and 20 metre acceleration, repeated sprintability, and their aerobic fitness through the yo-yo intermittent recovery test. And so then we delivered a 6-week game-based approach intervention with a sub-elite mid-adult group, and then tested them afterwards then to see what the outcomes were. On the actual intervention program itself, again, for my own sort of ease and simplicity, I went off the game moments again, and we did heavily again focus on, I suppose, the game moment of transition with a principle of play focus of give and go. We also focused on transition again, but with a more focus on third player runners, and then we focused on attack and organisation with a principle of play focus on switching the point of attack essentially, and I suppose maximising 1v1 opportunities. And maybe a slightly interesting point of it was week 1 to 3 was transition, give and go. So that was week 1. Week 2 was transition, third player runners. Week 3 was attack and organisation, switch the point of attack. Week 4 then we returned back then to week 1, but progressed it on a small bit. So I think Stephen Harvey calls it like a spiraling of learning outcomes essentially. So you're constantly reverting back to what you've introduced, but progressing on that small bit more. I suppose, look, the outcomes then, the main outcome was there was a significant difference in aerobic fitness going off the yo-yo intermittent recovery test, and well above, I suppose, the smallest worthwhile change in that yo-yo. So I think there was an average, as far as there was an average increase in distance covered of 450 metres. The smallest worthwhile change in the yo-yo is about, I would say, I think it's 160 to 200 metres as far as I'm aware. So there was a really statistically significant difference in that test. In all the other tests, there was no significant difference. So there was no significant improvement in repeated sprintability. Now, some might be surprised at that, and I was a bit surprised at it, but when you look at some of the small set of game research that's out there, it does align with what that is saying, essentially, that there is negligible changes in repeated sprintability. And maybe as might expected then, no significant difference in acceleration performance or linear sprint speed, and no significant differences in jump performance, so either lower body rate of force development or reactive strength. And then just another caveat is we had a comparison group lined up, which obviously would give great sort of weight to the results. But unfortunately, although we baseline tested them, we just couldn't manage to get them back for post-testing, and multiple things just came into that. Some of which were out of our control, which is unfortunate. We are looking to get a retrospective comparison group, so as in getting a team now coming into probably that time of year when teams want to be tested and stuff like that, and just they will essentially do their habitual training essentially, and I'll monitor that, get session plans from them, and then just test them, use the same testing battery, and just see what improvements potentially or what changes they had then. But yeah, hopefully we've covered.
Oh yeah, no, that's really good. Couple of questions first. Is this based around the old or the new rules?
This is actually the old rules, yeah. So, sorry, no, you're wrong. No, sorry, I'm wrong. It was the new rules. Sorry, the study 1 was the old rules. The intervention did incorporate the new rules. So, and when we did actually focus groups after the intervention as well with players and coaches, And some like strong feedback that came back was it actually allowed us to become more accustomed with the new rules because we're just playing games and training all the time. And that was an interesting sort of point. Obviously, a very niche point to this year, but yeah, it was a very kind of niche point, yeah.
Yeah, but even the fact that like the study one was focused on transitions, I think transitions have become much more important even with the new rules. So it actually, it wasn't wholly unuseful to the context study two was in. How long did they spend in games in the intervention? Like, what was the bout of gameplay there, and the number? Just a few details on the numbers and stuff.
Yeah, so look, it's a good question. So basically, it was similar to study one in that initial games would have been roughly 6 minutes on, 2 minutes off, and your small study game would have been 3 to 4 minutes on, 1.5 to 2 minutes off. In terms of number of games, so we did progressively overload it such a way that in weeks 1 to 3, the total time in gameplay was 34 minutes, or averaged 34 minutes in each session, whereas in weeks 4 to 6 it went up to 44 minutes, so a 10-minute increase in game time. And essentially the number of bouts, I suppose, so session 1 was more focused on, and this is another difference to the quantitative study, session 1 was more focused on larger extensive games, so your 10v10s, 12v12s, and again they were 6 minutes on, 2 minutes off. That ranged from 7 bouts in weeks 1 to 3, but progressed up to 8 bouts in weeks 4 to 6 in that session 1. Session 2 in the week then was more focused on smaller sided games, so you would have had your 4v4, 6v6 was the range there, and that started at 7 bouts, that started at 9 bouts but increased to 11 bouts in weeks 4 to 6, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that all makes perfect sense. I think like there's a really good like you were saying there around, if you were to go off some of your more lab-based studies for PhDs, it wouldn't really align to those, but there's a huge like ecological validity to what you're doing. Say this is representative of the real world, and the outputs of your studies will be like so usable by coaches in terms of designing games, have an idea around the potential outcomes at the end of a block of games for developing fitness. Like, because also even getting a control, like how do you get a control? How do you tell a team, okay, you're not going to train for 6 weeks because we want to see, do you not get fit or not? Like, there's no way you're getting a Gaelic football team to go along with that, because even when you're saying you'll get them to send you your session plans and all, it's rare a football team now, sure it does happen somewhere, but it's rare you'll get a football team that won't do some form of games in their block of pre-season training and stuff as well. So I think that's quite understandable. Might be harder for you to explain that in your Viva, but it is realistic.
Well, look, and you probably bring up a good point, and this is by no means a criticism of coaches or anything, but I suppose a lot of coaches would be under perception that they are delivering the games-based approach, whereas if you're strictly going off what the academic side of things says, you do need to adhere to the games-based approach session sequence. There does need to be strong connections to the pedagogical side of things in terms of the scaffolding you use, the questioning, the player-led discussion. And that's not me saying, coaches out there are wrong in what they're doing. Absolutely not. Far from it. But I'm just kind of giving that sort of rationale behind, like, if you're doing the games-based approach, or if you want to deliver a games-based approach, then just go at it full-heartedly, essentially, is what I'd be advising. And then you also bring up a good point around, and maybe I'm biased, but what you mentioned there is the ecological validity of this. And I think, like, if you look at a lot of the small-sided game protocols out there, and again, unbelievable information has come from small-sided games research, by no means criticising that, but it's just like how games are delivered in them studies. Are they actually how they're delivered on the pitch Tuesday, Friday, Sunday nights, whatever nights you're training? I'm not entirely sure, because there doesn't seem to be any mention of, like the coach's role in them protocols, things like that. There doesn't seem to be any mention of the principles of play you're promoting or the game moment you're aligning to. So, I think that's where the games-based approach research comes into it nicely in that aspect.
Yeah, because I was I've done a few bits on games-based approach as well, and I've seen some of the work by Shane Malone, Shane Magan, kind of from the late teens there, and some of the games-based work they did, and like some of the findings there are so good. Like they're really teased up. Like they probably teased up a lot for you to go on and do, and they drew from other sports. But when you look at the way the sessions are laid out, and they did 4-a-side, 4x4 players for 4 minutes with different bouts, and they extended the amount of bouts there, you're like, okay, this is really good for helping us to design sessions. But how impactful it was or realistic to develop in styles of play, you know, maybe there was loads of that and they just had no way of reporting in the paper, I don't know. And like, I completely understand the way they went about it. But yeah, this is very much the next step to progress on. Let's get fitter from games, but through the ways we want our teams to play.
Yeah, no, definitely. And like I would have used Shane Malone's research a lot, would have leaned on that a lot to design the intervention and things like that. And even Shane Manning's research as well, like that whole tactical periodisation framework for Gaelic football he publishes is unbelievable and really good insight there. And like that informs a lot, like the sessions there in terms of the game moments that I'm aligning to. So, but yeah, look, like you said, I think like the games-based approach, it does kind of it's potentially like how games are actually delivered in actual sessions. So
yeah. So the results from your intervention have kind of answered a few of the questions for me that I have lined up here, but I want to tease them out with some of it. So I asked like what are the benefits. We've touched on that. I want to know what definitely works. So we know that based on the results of the yo-yo test, provided you get enough like exposure to game demands within a game, you're probably going to get aerobically fitter and get a good bit of high speed running there. And then I'm like, what's potentially missing? So the fact we're not getting an improvement in RSI, power, acceleration, speed, or pre-sprint ability, if we decide as a coach for our team we want to get better at those, they are probably some of the buckets that need filling external to games. Is that like, am I saying, is it too much of a concrete statement, say this is definitely the case, or are there nuances? Could you tweak games a bit, or look, for now we're probably better off training those in isolation a bit?
No, look, I don't think you can necessarily say that from my study alone. Like I would never say that, but like if you combine it with a lot of the small sided game research as well, what they're seeing in terms of the physical capacities that aren't addressed in games, like I think there is, eventually we'll come to, you know, when more research done in games based approaches as well, eventually we'll come to more firm conclusions. But from my study alone, and even what I've taken it in my own coaching practice, I am kind of aligned with what you're saying there. So and even there is a caveat around the yo-yo intermittent recovery test improvements. Like just bear in mind that this was pre-season, so their fitness levels were markedly reduced probably at the start of this intervention. They've done this games-based approach intervention, which at least, look, it hasn't, you know, they haven't regressed or anything, or they haven't just stayed stagnant. They have, I suppose, received that improvement essentially. But does that mean that going forward, when they have a high level of aerobic fitness developed, will games-based approaches be sufficient to maintain that? Will games-based approaches be sufficient to continually improve that? That's a question I can't answer. I would probably, just from my own sort of experience, my own reading of the research, I'd probably lean more so it probably wouldn't. Particularly when you're hoping to develop that capacity across a group. But look, that's probably another point. In terms of pre-season though, definitely there is scope to use it to improve aerobic capacity when fitness levels mightn't be as high as they are come the latter stages of the year. In terms of repeated sprintability, again, like, yeah, I would say potentially isolated methods need to be incorporated there. If you look at some of the recent research that's come out by Fraser Thurlow, like it is a specific stimulus that's needed to improve repeated sprintability. And he's done a recent systematic review and meta-analysis on it. And you know, it is quite a specific stimulus. Like he mentioned 6 by 30 meter efforts, 6 reps by 3 sets. And within that, then you're also maintaining different qualities as well, like maintaining your potentially intermittent running performance, aerobic fitness, that kind of thing, while also developing repeated sprintability. In terms of the speed measures, then I'd be nearly fully saying like games won't develop your linear sprinting speed. That's something that, and in fairness, coaches are great in coaches nowadays are great in acknowledging, like, look, as S&C practitioners, we need that time in the warm up to incorporate some decent speed work, some decent speed exposures, and I think most coaches nowadays are fully accepting of that. And then in terms of like your reactive strength, counter movement, and lower body rated force development, like I suppose your strength and power training would come in there big time, and it's no surprise that games won't develop them qualities.
Yeah, no, like just to confirm all my own biases, I'm completely in agreement. Like in a practical side of all that stuff as well, and like any of the training I've been doing would completely mirror all that there. What I have, like, say, like the buckets that need filling, even in terms of some of the run demands, I try as much as possible to like complement my games. So if you're doing more extensive games in training, I'll probably do a bit more repeat sprint stuff or more change direction stuff the same night, say if that's your Tuesday night. Friday night, if you're doing more small sided stuff, I'll probably do a few longer runs there, whether it be more aerobic or like your tempo style stuff. And that kind of fits in well with some of the principles of the tactical periodization as well, like your the types of games you're using, and then you can, as I say, complement with the physical stuff you're doing then as well.
No, definitely, and yeah, like that would be an approach, and I know like in soccer that would be the approach essentially to kind of, as you say there, complement what the games are given and maybe provide an alternative stimulus in your isolated methods. Now I know in different sports like rugby, for example, they would have a specific theme on a specific day, and everything that you do on that day aligns with that theme. So, and like I can kind of see that point of view as well, because if you look at, we'll say, like the stuff I mentioned there on the session variability, if you accept that, yeah, we're doing games that are extensive in nature, that are going to promote high speed running, but you know that, right, the variability in the group is quite substantial, and in order to ensure that everyone is getting a high speed dose, or right, your isolated running need to be also facilitating that high speed running exposure on that day. If you're really going after that sort of metric, essentially. Equally then on your smaller sided games where you might be looking at accel, decel, or you might be looking at time above 90% heart rate max, if that is your theme for the day, should your isolated running also fit into that theme? Look, I'm not sure what the answer is. It's just there's many ways to do it, obviously. And I think maybe the sport you're in, the amount of recovery you have between training days, it probably impacts them sort of decisions, but there's obviously multiple ways to do it.
Now, there are fair points in rugby too. Like, I think some of the position-specific demands are so varied from player to player in rugby as well. It probably does make a bit more sense there. I'll give a shout out to my old classmate Barry O'Brien from college, who's going to Galway this year. If you want to come on and explain all that, Barry, you're more than welcome to go on someday. Give us all your secrets before you head into the Galway hurlers for the year. We've kind of touched on study 3 then already, what's come around the player characteristics, but just give us a brief overview there and kind of some of the main things you're hoping to dig into in a bit more detail.
Yeah, so again, we'll how exhaustive the testing battery will be, just might depend on the amount of time we have. The group that we're dealing with, we are looking to, it will be an academy squad hopefully, so an inter-county academy squad is what we're hoping to recruit, because we're probably going to differ between 3 and 4 game-based approach sessions, and so you'll need the same players attending them 3 to 4 sessions to get some kind of, I suppose, valid sort of measures or valid sort of findings. So I have to tease this out fully, but again, what we're thinking is get an idea of their neuromuscular power characteristics, acceleration and max velocity characteristics will be assessed as well. Potentially repeated sprintability and obviously aerobic capacity as well. So, and then we'll do an assessment game too, so to just assess their in-game technical proficiency, and then we'll deliver 3 to 4 games-based approaches sessions with that group, and essentially perform correlational analysis to see is there any correlations between player characteristics and, we'll say, the amount of total distance they're covering, the amount of high speed running meters they're covering, sprint distance, even as again, like I said at the start, even like the amount of time they're spending in heart rate zones and stuff like that. Look, in terms of practical applications, it will give us a nice idea of what type of physical profiles are either, I suppose, overloaded or underloaded through games-based approach sessions. And look, what underloaded and overloaded means, could mean a whole different, like whether you're going off gain demands, whether you're going off minimum effective dose for maintaining aerobic capacity. We'll hopefully be able to answer slightly, I suppose. Again, it won't provide absolute concrete findings, but we'll hopefully be able to provide more information around that.
Yeah, good stuff. And lastly, based on what you've done so far, like obviously you don't want to take on too much more, answer any more questions specific to yourself, but if someone else was eager to go down this path, are there any kind of major openings you see as like, oh, I would love to see the next person take on these few little areas in a study on this?
Yeah, it's probably going to be like more intervention research, I would say, in different populations, and really like not saturating, but like diving deep into that. Also, I'd like to, again, it's probably beyond the scope of what we're able to do, but is there some way of really digging deep underneath the hood of athletes around the physiological responses to these sessions, like in terms of lactate responses, that kind of thing? Like, that is really good information. That would be really good information if you could. But even like adaptations, like what are the mechanisms? So we found significant improvements in aerobic capacity as measured through the YOLO intermittent recovery test. But how them improvements in aerobic capacity came about, were they central mechanisms, so improvements in stroke volume, cardiac output, or were they more peripheral mechanisms, so the ability of the muscle to use oxygen, or like mitochondrial biogenesis, that kind of thing, without getting too much into detail. Like again, like that is really useful information if we could somehow, look, it'd be very, very difficult to do.
Yeah, but that'd be useful because it can help inform your complementary training. So say like if you know the majority benefits from game-based stuff are peripheral, then any extra, like you can go do your top-up training on a bike then with way less physical load, whereas if you know they're largely central, then you might need to do more specific top-up runs to get the peripheral adaptations. No, that's a really good point. Did you ever see the video, was it from Martin Boucher's PhD, where he was doing, did he do it on like Olympic handball players, I think? Small city games, and they actually had the gas exchange jokes on him playing Olympic handball. I was like, this.
I didn't see it, but yeah. My God is right, yeah. But I look in fair, like it's like that's unbelievable research. Look, it's just beyond the scope of what we were able to do in TUS at Lone there at the minute. We're able to do some fantastic work, but that's just beyond the scope. And look, my hunch is around like whether it's central or peripheral. And it's very hard to tell from my own study alone. But I suppose if you lean into some of the HIIT interventions that are out there, like typically central adaptations take 6 to 8 weeks or more to occur. So my intervention was 6 weeks. Again, it's very tentative sort of, but was that more of a peripheral improvement then? Because peripheral adaptations do typically occur that bit quicker, based on some of the research that's out there. So look, it's very tentative sort of implication or rationale, but just kind of thinking for myself as a coach as well.
You know, that's really interesting stuff as well. We'll wrap it up then. I asked people to finish off with one thing that's underrated, one thing that's overrated, can be related to S&C coaching, life in general, whatever you want.
Yeah, I suppose underrated. I think like zone 2 conditioning has become massive over the last number of years, and I just, not that I'm against that method per se or anything like that, but how it's typically like prescribed for team sport athletes, or how it's kind of pushed out there as in like 20 to 40 minutes once per week or once twice, like we just don't know what the minimum effective dose of zone 2 training is or anything. And don't get me wrong, it more than likely is effective, but if we're pushing this, if we're getting athletes to spend 20-40 minutes on a bike, like when we don't know this information around how long did it need to be perform this type of training, how many times per week, I just think there is a huge risk you're just wasting the person's time. And look, a good paper by Martin Bichette, we've mentioned it a few times there, did go into this in detail around is zone 2 necessary for team sport athletes, and also a recent meta-analysis came out around like zone 2 training. I forget the name of the researcher, and that was only in healthy populations, and it did, you know what I mean. So in terms of, so that's what's overrated.
Yeah, hold on, I'm coming in with you there. I completely agree with you. I think and I was actually chatting to one of the boys more, because Arthur Dunn, top class nutritionist, we were chatting about, and he's getting into triathlon training. So the first one I'll say in zone 2 training is like when coaches say, go for a zone 2 run, the majority of GAA players are not remotely able to stay in what is zone 2 by running. They just don't have they're not built, or they don't have the running experience to keep their heart rates that low while running. So it really has to be on a bike or some form of off-field training. But he was saying like in the triathlon club, racing's over, you have to spend the winter now in zone 2 to build up your base. And like, I think they're missing points there, because the research around saying 80% of their training is done in zone 2, Like that research is done in athletes who are still doing their 3 or 4 key sessions a week. So if you're someone who only trains 3 times a week, like to spend those, even one of those sessions in zone 2, it's such a waste of time because you're getting so little adaptation to it. If you're training 8 times a week, yeah, fair enough then, because there's no way you'll be able to recover from stuff otherwise. But if all you're doing is 2 or 3 sessions a week, like do something higher intensity because you've plenty of recovery time there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So no, look. Again, I'm not for one bit saying it's probably not effective, but like a lot of the rationale for it is taken from endurance athletes, like you said, and it's just like they're 2 different worlds. Team sport and endurance athletes. In terms of what's underrated, I think like the actual art of coaching is becoming more and more underrated, and I think and this is probably my biases, but like I would have started in boxing and strength and conditioning and boxing, and so big shout out to Boxing Science there in the UK. And like from day dot, like be a good coach first and foremost. Everything else will come after that, but be a good coach. Know your progressions, know how to coach main things, know how to get intent from your athletes. That was drilled into me from an early sort of beginning in my career. So, and I think look, there's unbelievable information around sports science, dashboards, GPS at the minute, but like, are we pushing the art of coaching slightly further back? And I just don't know if that's the right thing to do. But so I'd say that's underrated.
Oh man, what an excellent point to finish on. Fair play. Couldn't agree with that more. That's excellent. Here, if anyone wants to get in contact with you, throw out a few details there where people can follow, but there's no way I'm following that up with anything from me. I'm on
LinkedIn there. Cian O'Dea. I'm on Instagram, Cian O'Dea _SC. So look, always love chatting to coaches. If I can help them at all, I'll try my best to. But yeah, and look, just a couple of resources out if anyone to kind of maybe from a practical perspective around games-based approaches. So the Game Sense coach website is unbelievable by the Lavins. Again, I've no necessarily affiliation with them, but just to help me out massively at the start of my PhD. So
and Lavin Brothers, if either of you want to come on at any stage, I'm open to take a call.
I'm sure they would. They're gas men. They're gas men. They love coaching but no, look. If you're a coach and you really want to implement this games-based approach, like that'd be my first port of call. Also, just keep an eye out on Connacht GAA's resources coming out. So, like in the coming year, we'll hope to produce more and more games-based approach content, which will be hopefully really applicable to coaches. So, just keep a lookout for that. Yeah,
that's excellent stuff, Cian. Thank you very much for coming on today, and we'll definitely have you back on in the future when you've wrapped up that study tree and have a few more findings from it.
That's it. No, thanks very much, John. Look, like I said to you before coming on here, this podcast is, I think it's filling an important area. Every episode you come away with something from it. So hopefully I've managed to give some nuggets there to people. But look, thanks very much again for having me on.
Very much so. Fair play.